Hey everybody, this is Chapter 12, Section 1, Trails West. Chapter 12 is the Manifest Destiny chapter, or more important, it is the last chapter of the year. So yes, this chapter, and then after this chapter, the only thing you have to worry about is the final. So Mr. Thompson and I broke up sections 1 and 2, just like last chapter. You're going to have a test on that. And then section 3 and 4 are going to be just one loom, and then you're going to have a test on that. So let's get started with section 1, Trails West. So mountain men were the most important people to open up the West on the western side of the Mississippi River after Lewis and Clark mapped out the North Park and Zeb Pike mapped out the South. The most important thing to these men were beaver. So beaver fur was a very expensive, very sought after item. And so what these men did was they moved out west and they trapped these beaver and then they sold them. And the number one thing that the beaver fur was used to make were beaver hats. So here's a couple examples over here on the right hand side. That's actually beaver fur that was used to make these hats. Here's a cute little beaver down here. And then not these hats. And then not these hats either, but basically these types of hats were what they were used for. So what animals were the first trappers most interested in? Beaver. And then why were they so important? Because they were used to make men's hats. So Jedediah Smith and Jim Beckwourth were two very famous fur trappers and mountain traders. Jedediah Smith, you might remember from a movie that they made, Night at the Museum, or those museum movies. He was one of the main characters in the movie. And can anybody guess this is not beaver fur right here that this mountain man is portraying here? Can anybody guess what kind of fur this is? I kind of circled this part to give you an idea. Yeah. And then here's what they look like. So look, this is Jedediah Smith up here, and this is Owen Wilson portrayed him in the movie, and then here's Jim Beckwourth here. And then in the 90s, they made a series of stamps for Legends of the West, and Jim Beckwourth was one of the stamps. You could tell this is over 20 years ago. Look, these stamps, I think, are 29 cents. Does anybody know how much it costs to mail a 1-ounce letter today? So if you were paying your bills and you had to put a stamp on it, does anybody know how much a stamp is today? They have these things called forever stamps. We haven't put numbers on stamps in a few years now because they keep changing the price of the stamps. So once you buy the stamp, if the price goes up, it's okay. You already paid for it at a lower price. You get to use it. Stamps are 55 cents a piece now. Okay. So this man was also very important, William Ashley. He started the idea of the rendezvous system. So a lot of these fur trappers didn't like these traders or these buyers coming to buy the furs off of them, because then the buyers would see where they were trapping the beaver and they would just go and get the beaver themselves. So this man thought up the rendezvous system where you would set a date and roughly a time where you would meet with him nowhere near where you were trapping the beaver, and then you would exchange the beaver for whatever supplies you would get from him, and then he would go his way back to the city, and then after he wasn't going to follow you, you would go back to where you were trading them. And then eventually silk hats replaced beaver hats as the importance in society. So this wasn't important in society anymore, but it really helped extend our trails westward that we're going to learn about in this chapter, and eventually all of Manifest Destiny. So the reason they trusted this William Ashley is because he made a fair way of exchanging the beaver pelts for the supplies or the money that he was paying them for. So he was trustworthy because he was fair. And then again, silk hats replaced beaver fur hats in men's fashion, so it kind of died out. Here's another picture of a mountain man. And again, other than Lewis and Clark and Zeb Pike, these people wrote a lot more about the West and gave people an idea of what they were getting into when they thought about moving out that way. So different ways to get out west. One of the more popular ways was the southern pass through the mountains. The southern pass was way safer than the northern pass because snow didn't block it as often as the northern pass, which was blocked for months and months. So the southern trail was easier to take because it was safer. Okay. And then writings start to come out. There used to be a show on TV about this guy named Grizzly Adams. These are the actors on the show, and this is the story of what it came out of. Many of the Westerners went out there for a chance to get rich by striking gold. Many other Americans also wanted to take the American Indians' land away from them. That's a map activity that we're not going to do this year. These land speculators were people that bought land, big plots of land, with the idea that maybe later it would go up in value and they would make a lot of money. So land speculators also became a major part of Manifest Destiny, buying up big pieces of land and then selling off the plots, sort of like a developer does in a neighborhood nowadays, but in a way bigger area. There was risks involved. If the value of the land went up, the speculator made money, but if the value went down, the speculators lost money. William Becknell also made a trail to Santa Fe known as the Santa Fe Trail. Another way to go out west, the Santa Fe Trail made him large profits. The trail was very dangerous, much more than the Southern Pass. Dehydration was a major concern during this trail. Water was a very hard thing to carry over long distances. Water takes up a lot of room, and you use a lot of it, and it's very heavy. So his Western Trail was the Santa Fe Trail. And it was the most dangerous because of dehydration. If you run out of water and you dehydrate, that's a bad way to die, right? And then Oregon became a very popular area for settlement. Originally, missionaries went out to Oregon. They were not successful, but originally they went out to convert the natives to become Christians and to practice the white people's ways. And again, they were not very successful, but also, just like people using the Santa Fe Trail and the Southern Pass, they wrote about a lot of great soil and living out in the West that they thought would have been a better life to have. Their wagons were called schooners because when they went down these trails, from a distance, you couldn't see the wheels of the wagon because it was kicking up so much dust. So it actually looked like the wagons were boats going across the trails instead of wagons. And so a type of boat is a schooner. And so their wagons were called schooners because they looked like boats going down the dirt trails. So missionaries were people to try to convert the American Indians for religious reasons, and they were not successful. They had very little success, but again, they wrote about the greatness of the land out west. So most pioneers went out there to try to get rich, but Mormons were a religious group that moved out west because their ways were not welcome in the East. So they weren't missionaries. They weren't trying to convert natives. They were just wanting to move to an area that they all could live together without fear that people would judge them on their religion. So again, the main reason most settlers went out west to get rich, although the Mormons went out there for religious reasons. The original Mormon leader in Chicago was killed as they were going through, even though they weren't staying in Illinois. A mob gathered around them saying that they didn't want their kind of people living in the area. And before they could make them believe that we're not staying here, we're just traveling through, their leader was killed. And a guy named Brigham Young took over. Brigham Young eventually led his men and women and children to Utah. They worked together to build dams and the canals in the Great Salt Lake area. And that's the exact John O. Sullivan quote of Manifest Destiny. And then this famous painting was a famous painting of the different ways and the different things that people did to move out west. So this is the Manifest Destiny painting that became popular. And that's section 1.